What do three small boats and six desperate men have in common with one of the most powerful warships on Earth? They were all about to find out exactly where the line between warning and consequence gets drawn. It was 5:17 in the morning, the water was dark, the horizon was flat, and somewhere out in the Gulf of Aden, three small boats were accelerating toward a decision they could not take back. Before we get into what happened next, if this kind of real, unfiltered military analysis is what you're looking for, hit that subscribe button right now and ring the bell. Share this with someone who thinks they know how modern naval standoffs actually work, because what played out that morning goes far deeper than the headlines ever showed. The morning watch on board the U.S. Navy destroyer was quiet. Sailors were doing what sailors do in those heavy pre-dawn hours, staying alert, staying focused, letting the hum of the engines and the sweep of the radar fill the silence. The water was black beneath them. The sky was barely starting to separate from the sea. Then the surface radar lit up. 3 contacts, small, fast, closing from the east. Inside the Combat Information Center, a sailor leaned toward his screen and reported it to the bridge. 3 small craft bearing 086, roughly 12 nautical miles out and accelerating. Up on the bridge, nobody flinched. That's the first thing you need to understand about how the Navy operates under pressure. Panic doesn't enter the room. It's not trained out of them. It's replaced with something sharper. Procedure. The officer of the deck raised his binoculars toward the darkness. Nothing visible yet. Just that thin strip of gray where dawn was slowly winning the argument against night. But the radar didn't care about visibility. The radar was already telling a story. These 3 contacts had no AIS beacon broadcasting their position, no navigation lights following any standard pattern, no flag, no radio call, nothing that any legitimate vessel would have transmitted automatically. And they were not drifting the way fishing boats drift after a long night out. They were moving with purpose, and the purpose was getting clearer with every passing second. By 5:18, the radar was tracking their formation. 1 boat on the center line, 2 offset wide, not clustered together the way friends travel, but spread in a loose fan. That kind of spacing is not accidental. Fishermen coming home don't spread into a fan formation. That geometry means something specific. It means the people driving those boats have thought about angles. The officer of the deck ordered the first radio hail. The transmission went out over the bridge-to-bridge frequency, calm and clear. A United States Navy warship operating in international waters was identifying itself and instructing the approaching vessels to alter course immediately. Static came back. The boats kept coming. At 5:19, the range had dropped under 9 nautical miles. The electro-optical camera was now picking up their wakes. 3 sharp white lines cutting across the dark water. The center boat was pulling ahead of the other 2. Its bow was riding high, engines wide open, slamming through the chop. On the bridge, the captain stepped in. He hadn't been called. He had heard enough through the passageway speakers to know where this was going. He studied the tactical display. 3 small craft, 0 radio response, closing formation, accelerating toward his ship. His expression didn't shift. He gave his orders quietly. Maintain course. Log everything. Issue a second hail. The second warning went out, slower and more deliberate than the first. The boats didn't respond. They didn't slow down. They kept coming. By 5:20, the lookouts on the starboard wing had visual. 3 black shapes, low in the water, rising and disappearing between the swells. They were not large. A destroyer doesn't worry about the size of an approaching vessel the way a civilian might imagine. Size is not the threat. Speed is a threat. Surprise is a threat. And a crew willing to close on a billion-dollar warship at 30 knots without answering a single radio call, that is a threat. Inside the Combat Information Center, the watch team was building the picture systematically. Bearings, speeds, spacing, and formation changes recorded in real time. Every data point was making the same argument. This was not routine traffic. The center boat adjusted its angle slightly, cutting more directly toward the destroyer's starboard bow. The 2 flanking boats started widening their spread, as if trying to divide the ship's attention across multiple directions at once. The bridge got the update immediately. The captain's response was measured and precise. Set security posture, man all key stations. 0 escalation without his direct order. The ship responded. Boots moved across steel decks. Watertight hatches opened and closed. Security details took their positions. Lookouts pressed their binoculars harder. Camera feeds sharpened. And along the starboard rail, the heavy machine gun crews moved into place. Hands ready, barrels angled down, waiting. What happened in those minutes is important to understand because it looks, from the outside, like restraint. And it was restraint. But it was not passive. It was controlled pressure, applied layer by layer, deliberately, with every action designed to give the approaching boats a reason to stop while simultaneously making absolutely certain they could not catch the crew off guard. At 5:21, the lookouts reported something on the lead boat. Multiple figures crowded toward the bow. One was standing, gripping the rail with one hand and holding something long in the other. Too far to identify with certainty, too close to ignore. The captain's response? Keep recording. 2 words. That was it. Because in the Strait of Hormuz, documentation is not a backup plan. It is a weapon. Every second of video, every timestamp, every logged warning, every recorded position, that is the evidence file that gets built in real time, and it matters as much as anything else that happens in the encounter. The third warning went out at 5:22, this time simultaneously over radio and the ship's external loudspeakers, the sound rolling across the water loud enough to feel physical. The lead boat did not veer. It accelerated, past 33 knots, past 34, past 35. The hull was slamming against the chop hard enough to soak the men on board. The 2 flanking boats maintained their wide angles, clamping toward the destroyer's forward quarter from both sides. The deck officer looked at the captain. Distance was dropping below 5 nautical miles. The captain gave one new order. Put the helicopter crew on high alert. Aft of the bridge, the flight deck came alive. The MH-60R Seahawk, a multi-mission helicopter built for exactly this kind of situation, was being made ready. Not to start a firefight, to stop one before it started. At 5:23, the dawn had brightened enough that the full picture was now visible to the naked eye. 3 pirate skiffs, running flat out, no flags, radio silence, converging on a U.S. Navy warship that had warned them 4 times and had yet to fire a single shot. This is a good moment to pause, because if you're finding this analysis useful, if the kind of detailed, layer-by-layer breakdown of how real military encounters unfold is something you want more of, then do this right now. Drop a comment with the word Hormuz so I know you made it this far. And share this video with one person. Just one. Someone who's never thought carefully about what naval discipline actually looks like under pressure, because that's what this story is really about. Back on the water. 5:24, local time. The destroyer's atmosphere had shifted. Not loudly. No alarm was needed. The crew knew. Throughout the ship, the intercom delivered its message in a flat, steady tone. Security alert. Security alert. Man all required combat stations. Nobody needed to hear it twice. Along the starboard rail, gunners positioned themselves behind the heavy weapons mounts, triggers untouched, barrels pointed down, eyes fixed on the water. That discipline is the difference between a trained naval crew and anything else. The difference is not aggression, it is the complete absence of wasted motion. At 5:25, the electro-optical camera zoomed in tighter on the lead skiff. The feed was shaking with the swells, then it locked in. 4 men in the forward section, 2 near the stern, 1 crouching next to something covered by a tarp. The sensor operator tightened the focus and called it out. Possible ladder, possible fuel cans, unknown long object in the forward section. Those words hit differently in a combat information center. A ladder means boarding, extra fuel means they plan to go further than they claimed, an unidentified long object means you do not get to relax. The captain's orders came immediately. Do not assume weapons. Do not assume they are harmless. Keep recording. That is the knife edge. Every sailor on that ship understood it. Overreact, and you create an international incident before sunrise. Underreact, and a skiff reaches the hull with gear designed for exactly that purpose. At 5:26, the destroyer switched on its searchlights. Blinding white beams cut across the dark water and hit the lead boat like a wall. The men on board threw their hands up against the glare. For just a moment the lead boat wavered. Then it corrected and kept coming. A junior officer on the bridge muttered under his breath that they were really doing this. The captain heard him. He said, "They are being recorded doing this." That was all. The cameras caught everything. Timestamps burned into the footage. GPS coordinates locked to every frame. The Navy was not just defending a ship. It was building an evidence record that could survive any political argument that came later. At 5:27, the southern flanking skiff cut inward, angling toward the destroyer's beam. The formation had stopped simply closing distance. It was shaping, spreading to create angles that would force the crew to track threats from multiple directions simultaneously. Pirates who attack warships don't expect a fair fight. They expect confusion, hesitation, and a brief moment of vulnerability. They rush the hull, fracture the crew's attention, and then strike in the gap. The problem with that strategy, applied to this particular ship, is that this ship was designed to simultaneously track incoming missiles, aircraft, submarines, drones, and surface contacts. 3 skiffs were not confusion. 3 skiffs were Tuesday with poor judgment. At 5:28, the weapons teams received permission to show presence. The 50 caliber mounts pivoted, not firing, not yet tracking the boats aggressively, just moving, visibly, deliberately. That movement required no translation in any language. The message was simple and absolute. We are done being patient. The lead skiff held its course. The destroyer's horn fired, a single massive blast, low and physical, rolling across the waves like something you feel in your chest before you hear it with your ears. On the lead boat, men looked up. One pointed at the destroyer. Still no radio response. Still no turn. Inside the Combat Information Center, the updated range came in. Lead target at 3.2 nautical miles. Intercept time under 4 minutes. In a movie, 4 minutes feels like time. In the Strait of Hormuz, 4 minutes is nothing. It is the distance between a warning and an outcome. Back on the flight deck, the Seahawk crew was ready. The pilot was in. The sensor operator had the cameras running. A crewman crouched near the tie-downs, waiting for the green light. This helicopter was not going airborne to escalate. It was going up to make escalation unnecessary. At 5:29, the loudspeakers went out one more time. The warning was direct and final in tone. The northern boat dropped speed. The lead skiff pushed harder. It crossed the starboard bowline and kept surging, close enough now that the men on those boats could look up and see the wall of American steel above them. Maybe they thought the captain would hesitate at the last moment. Maybe they had spent years working against unarmed merchant ships and thought the reaction would be the same. Or maybe they had simply committed too fully to turn back. At 5:30, the lead boat broke inside 3 nautical miles. The Combat Information Center called it clearly. Lead target still inbound. Hostile intent cannot be ruled out. The captain looked at the flight deck camera feed, then he looked at the tactical screen, then he gave the order. Launch the Seahawk. The rotors spun up, the deck crew pulled clear. The MH-60R lifted off hard and banked starboard, nose pointed directly at the approaching skiffs. It dropped low over the swells. Thermal sensor locked onto the center boat. The infrared image showed 6 heat signatures. Maybe 7. Someone crouched near the back. Another pressed against the front rail. The sensor operator called it in. Multiple figures forward. Possible boarding ladder. Cylindrical object, starboard side of the cabin. The captain's response was the same as before. Keep it classified as unknown. Keep broadcasting warnings. The Seahawk went out on open frequency. Small craft approaching a Navy warship. This is a United States Navy aircraft. Alter your course immediately. You are at risk of collision. Dead silence. Just roaring outboard engines, rotor wash, and bad decisions closing the gap. At 5:33, the helicopter swung wide and came in low across the lead skiff's port side, not recklessly close, but close enough that the crew on that boat looked up. One blocked the glare with his arm. Another pointed, first at the helicopter, then at the ship. That confirmed something important. These men were not lost. They knew exactly who was watching them, and they kept going anyway. The Seahawk broadcast again. Turn away immediately. Abort your approach. Silence. Inside Combat Information, the lead skiff was inside 2.1 nautical miles. The northern boat was lagging. The southern boat was flaring wider. A deliberate attempt to split the ship's tracking across 3 separate inbound contacts. A petty officer at the radar tracked it in real time. Lead craft remains the primary, but the captain's order was clear. Track everything. Do not lose any of them. At 5:34, the sensor operator on the helicopter zoomed in on the tarp at the rear of the lead boat. It had slipped. Underneath the lens picked up plastic fuel containers, heavy rope, and what appeared to be metal hooks or a folding ladder. No single item was a smoking gun. But combined with the speed, the silence, the formation, and the distance they had already closed, the picture in every sailor's mind was the same. The bridge called it. Final warning, authorized if they crossed 2 nautical miles. The captain nodded once. The ship's speakers went out across the water with a force that had no ambiguity left in it. Final warning. Turn away immediately. The Seahawk echoed the same message from above. For the first time, the lead boat wavered. The bow twitched 3 degrees right, then snapped back left, still coming. At 5:35, the helicopter made its most aggressive move. It cut directly across the lead skiff's path, banking steep and low. The men on the boat could read the lettering on the hull. Rotor wash hammered the water in front of them. The message needed no voice. You are out of ocean. We see every inch of what you are doing. This ends one way or another. The driver leaned forward over the controls and pushed the throttle harder. Engines screaming. Range at 1.8 nautical miles. The starboard gun crews were locked. Nobody fired. Nobody flinched. Every sailor braced and held. In the Seahawk, the pilot called it in. Lead craft accelerating. Combat information confirmed it a moment later. Lead contact at 36 knots. Still closing. Something shifted on that ship in that moment. Not loudly, not visibly. But every person on board felt it move. This was no longer an ambiguous encounter. This was a high-speed run at a United States Navy warship by a crew that had ignored every warning, every searchlight, every radio call, every helicopter pass, and every visible gun position. At 5:36, the lead boat crossed 1.6 nautical miles. The Seahawk stayed in orbit above. The destroyer held course, and the standoff compressed into one brutal, simple question. Would they turn before the Navy was forced to answer in a language with no words? At 5:37, the lead skiff blew past the invisible line. 1.5 nautical miles. Still inbound. Still fast. Still silent. On the bridge, the captain stared at the tactical screen. The screen didn't filter for emotion or politics or fear. It only processed geometry. A fast-moving small boat, a closing angle. A warship with seconds left to resolve what was in front of it. Bridge, combat information. Lead contact holding at 36 knots. Closest point of approach now under 500 yards without a course change. 500 yards sounds like distance until you do the math. Against a boarding attempt or a boat packed with explosives, 500 yards from a vessel this size is measured in milliseconds. The captain gave the final order. All channels. Full volume. Maximum. The radio operator went out first, then the loudspeaker, loud enough to roll over every wave between them. You are approaching a protected military vessel. Change course immediately, or defensive measures will be taken. The lead boat held its line. At 5:38, the two trailing skiffs started moving differently. The northern boat slowed and veered outward. The southern boat swung wide, stretching the ship's attention across a broader arc. A classic tactic for pulling a target's focus in too many directions at once. Inside combat information, the radar picture updated. Outer contacts moving. Lead target remains primary. Southern contact opening its angle. The captain answered immediately. Track everything. Do not lose the lead. Above, the Seahawk maintained its orbit. Camera locked. The pilot called in. Lead craft showing zero signs of compliance. That sentence moved through the warship like a sealed door closing. On the starboard rail, the gun barrels shifted into full view. Not raised to fire, but visible. Deliberately. Unmistakably visible. Every angle calculated. Every sightline locked. The kind of body language that even men in a bouncing speedboat running on adrenaline could read without translation. At 5:39, the destroyer made a controlled course adjustment, not a retreat, not a panic swerve, a calculated geometric shift, just enough to disrupt the attack angle the lead boat had been steering toward. Thousands of tons of warship responded to the helm with quiet precision, churning white water down both flanks. The lead skiff reacted too late. Its bow slammed over the chop and jerked to correct. That correction told command everything it needed to confirm. They were still actively steering to intercept. They had not stopped trying. The captain's voice stayed completely level. Understood. No countdown. No speech. Every defensive layer was operational, and nobody needed to be told twice. At 5:40, the ship's horn blasted again. Searchlights pinned the lead boat in white glare. The Seahawk swept behind it, rotor wash tearing the surface of the water into broken rings. And for the first time, something changed on the lead skiff. The man near the bow crouched low. Another grabbed the rail. The driver shot a look back at his flanking boats and found them gone. The northern skiff had already bled off its speed and pulled away. The southern skiff had drifted too far wide to offer any quick support. What had begun as a coordinated three-boat approach had quietly fallen apart while the lead driver was focused on the destroyer in front of him. He was alone. At 5:41, the lead skiff crossed inside 1 nautical mile. Combat information called it immediately. Lead target inside 1 nautical mile. Still approaching. The captain made his call. Authorized defensive posturing. Ready warning measures. Hold fire unless directly ordered. The gun crews shifted. Every movement precise, visible, and final. The Seahawk descended lower and broadcast directly at them. Turn your vessel away immediately. We are recording every second of this. You are creating a hostile situation with no exit. The lead skiff held its course for 3 more seconds. In the Strait of Hormuz, 3 seconds is not nothing. 3 seconds is the difference between a tense encounter and a tragedy. Then the driver cracked. The bow snapped hard, right, way too hard. The boat threw its own weight sideways, ocean spray exploding over the crew. One man lost his footing against the cabin frame. Another grabbed the stern tarp as gear slid across the wet deck. On the destroyer, nobody cheered. There was no time. Lead contact is turning away. Speed is dropping. Course is widening. Maintain track, the captain ordered, because one turn is just one turn. One turn is not surrender. One turn is the first data point in a new set of questions. At 5:42, the northern boat followed. Then the southern skiff hesitated. That last beat of a bad decision reconsidered. Before peeling off too. 3 white wakes, curving away across the gray morning water. The trap had failed. Not because the pirates suddenly found wisdom, but because the Navy had closed every option available to them. No blind spot to exploit. No moment of hesitation to rush into. No soft target. No gap in the sensor coverage. No unguarded angle. Just a destroyer, a helicopter, a locked-in crew, and a tightening circle of consequences that left nowhere to go. At 5:43, the captain watched the radar track for a long moment. Then, keep the Seahawk on them, prep the boarding team, because backing off was not walking away clean. Not after that run. Not after 6 ignored warnings. Not after charging a U.S. Navy warship inside 1 nautical mile at 36 knots. The inflatable boarding craft was rigged on the starboard side. The strike team moved with the efficiency of people who have done this before. Helmets, armor, communications, restraints, cameras. No wasted energy, no noise. This was not revenge. This was procedure. At 5:46, the destroyer's radio went out one more time. Small craft, kill your engines. Keep your hands visible. The lead skiff's outboard motor choked down to idle. The northern boat complied. The southern skiff drifted wide, still weighing something. The Seahawk shifted its position and cut across the southern boat's path with enough presence to make the decision easy. At 5:47, all 3 were compliant. Not secure, compliant. The difference mattered. Compliant meant the engines were off. Secure meant there was no longer any possibility of a final, fatal surprise. At 5:48, the boarding craft hit the water. It bounced once off the chop and tore forward. The boarding officer crouched low, eyes locked on the lead skiff. The team approached with speed that communicated authority and control that communicated precision. From the air, the helicopter watched the geometry. From the deck, optics tracked the hands of every man on those boats. From the boarding craft, the team studied their faces. 3 layers, 1 problem. At 5:50, they pulled alongside. Hands visible. Do not move. 6 men, drenched, silent. Young enough to look shaken. Old enough to understand exactly what they had just tried to do. The boarding team came aboard, fast and clean. The first man was pulled from the helm, the second from the stern. The rest were ordered down into plain sight. Every movement was on camera before anyone touched anything. At 5:52, the search began. Under the tarp, plastic fuel containers, heavy rope, steel hooks, and a folding boarding ladder. Nothing that needed much interpretation. These men were not fishing. They were running at a warship with gear designed for one purpose and one purpose only. That is the reality of piracy in these waters. It does not announce itself with a flag or a declaration. It comes in fast, in the dark, with equipment that only makes sense up close and a calculation that someone else's hesitation is worth betting on. One by one, all 3 skiffs were cleared, documented, and secured. 0 shots fired, 0 American casualties, not a single mark on the warship. The pirates had not come close enough to touch the hull. Inside the Combat Information Center, the room stayed quiet. Adrenaline doesn't disappear. It just goes underground, buried under the work that has to happen next. Logs to fill, footage to preserve, coordinates to verify, timestamps to match against every radio call. The line between a clean operation and a complicated one is often built entirely out of paperwork nobody will ever see. The U.S. Navy sees it. That is why the system holds. At 5:58, the boarding team reported back. Suspected piracy equipment recovered. All suspects detained. 0 casualties. The captain gave one nod. Keep documenting. Keep the helicopter overhead until every boat is fully secure. Outside, dawn had finished arriving. The destroyer's gray hull moved through the water as if the morning had been entirely routine. But something real had happened here. 3 pirate skiffs had rushed a warship flat out, in formation, before sunrise. They had ignored warnings delivered by radio, loudspeaker, helicopter, searchlight, and horn. They had crossed inside 1 nautical mile of a vessel with the firepower to end the encounter in seconds. And they had walked away, in restraints, because the crew they faced was trained well enough to win without pulling a trigger. They had counted on hesitation. They found radar lock. They had expected panic. They found cold procedure. They had banked on a soft target and discovered that the target was tracking them on 17 different systems before they ever saw the ship clearly. By 6:10, the skiffs were secured, the detained men were processed, the evidence was filed. The destroyer resumed its course. No ceremony, no announcement, no dramatic ending. Just another log entry, and 3 boats that would not be rushing anyone again that day. Here is what this encounter actually proves, and it's worth sitting with. The most powerful thing that happened that morning was not a weapon being pointed or a trigger being considered. It was a crew that had trained so thoroughly for this exact scenario that every response was automatic, every layer deployed without panic, and every decision traceable on video. Real power in these waters doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to. It just holds the line until the other side runs out of options. And then it handles what's left with the same quiet precision it used for everything else. If this kind of breakdown, the real mechanics behind military encounters, told without dramatizing or simplifying, is something you want more of, then this channel is built for you. Subscribe if you haven't. Share this video if it made you think differently about what discipline actually looks like in a moment of real pressure. And drop your honest answer in the comments. If you're standing on that bridge at 5:41 in the morning with a skiff inside 1 nautical mile and still closing, what do you do?